Namaste, and welcome back to another episode of What's in a Word. Here we'll be delving into the origins and background of certain everyday English words that we use when talking about or explaining Hindu Dharmas. I'm your host, Samir Kalra, one of the managing directors at HAF, and I'm joined today by my colleague and HAF's Director of Education, Dr. Vijay Satnarine. So today, Vijay, we're going to be talking about the word soul. When I searched for the definition of soul, I was actually surprised to see the dictionary is using a lot more Eastern concepts to translate the word than they do the original Christian English concept. Can you tell us why that is, and where actually does the word soul originate from?
Namaste, Samir. This is one of the more subtle words, I do admit, but the English word soul comes from the Proto-Germanic word. And that is the source of many of the Northern European words, like Seele in German, which all mean from the sea. This is because in Northern Europe, in the pre-Christian traditions that were practiced by the tribes there, it was the thought that the life force of humans after death would stop at the nearest lakes before moving on to the afterlife, and also that the first humans emerged from the sea. But by the 14th century, of course, after the Norse and Germanic peoples had interacted with the English peoples a little more, and the Christianization of Europe had taken place, the word was linked with the Christian concept of psyche, which is actually appropriated from Greek philosophy. And as we know, Greek philosophy was very much influenced and in conversation with Indian philosophy for centuries. Psyche was used in the Greek Bible to translate soul, and spirit was a different thing altogether, but somehow in modern English, both soul and spirit seem intertwined and melded together. There is a difference in Christianity between soul and spirit, and in the early Torah, the notion of an immortal soul didn't even exist. It happened, of course, after the expulsion of Jews to Babylon. So in these cultures, soul refers to the breath of life that God breathed into Adam and Eve and into human bodies. And so it's too imprecise of a translation for the exceedingly deep concept that Hindu and other Dharmas traditions use, which is Atman.
Thanks for that explanation, Vijay. So if you can elaborate as to why we shouldn't use the term soul to translate the Sanskrit word Atma.
Yeah, the Christian understanding of the soul depends on God breathing life into the human body. Christianity does state, like we do, that the soul is different to the body, but in Christianity, it's the seat of emotions and humanity. Another common thought among Abrahamic religions is that this is the true portion of the human that will be raised up to heaven by the Messiah on Judgment Day, or be condemned to hellfire. So there is also a confusion, as I mentioned before, of the word's relation to spirit, spirit being that which respires, that which breathes in some part of the Bible. Some parts of the Bible have soul and spirit as being different, and in other parts they're used interchangeably. The Dharma traditions, however, are clear that this thing, the principle that is living or life, is prana. Prana is life breath. And it is a function of a body that's alive, just like the mind, consciousness, and intellect. But what we are is different even to them. So what did Hindus think? Our ancient seers determined through deep reasoning and research that our nature is an eternal principle called Atman. One way that word is derived comes from the root at, which means constantly moving. And it means that it is a principle that's never still. It moves through different states of being again and again, but it is still the same unchangeable thing. Atman is also a unique characteristic of a given thing, so it can also mean essence. So the final point I'll just say about that is that in our Hindu Dharma traditions, there are numerous, and I mean numerous, thoughts about Atman. But ultimately, it is not the breath of life that God breathed into us. That's not even a concept in our monotheist Hindu Dharma traditions. In these traditions, Atman can be seen as the principle of self that is either a spark of Paramatma, of Bhagavan, the Supreme Being, or a part of the Supreme Being. In the non-theist Hindu Dharma traditions, Atman is an eternal principle, the essence of the individual or the essence of the universe itself. It could also be the principle of just self, very, very plain and simple. Like in English, we say myself, right? So Atman can be that. In some Hindu traditions, only Atman exists. In other tradition, each individual is Atman. And so there is infinite numbers of Atmans, lots of diversity. Boiling it down, ultimately to translate Atman as soul is to limit something that's exceedingly rich and logically reasoned. There are philosophical discussions that are so wide, to really narrow it down into something like soul is a concept in Christianity. I don't think that tracks. It doesn't satisfy either Christians through English or our expectations through Sanskrit.
Interesting. So with that being said, what would you suggest as a better alternative to soul for translation for Atma? And why is that the best translation to use?
Right. Well, remember, translation is not about translating a word for word. It's about using appropriate words to translate a concept. So the choices to translate Atman could be simply just self, whether that's universal self or individual self. Or essence, again, universal or individual. Depending on what your tradition teaches, you could use either. But in circumstances where people aren't familiar with discussions on these topics, you could perhaps get away with the word spirit, as this has closer ties to Greek thought, which is closer to ancient Bharatiya thought. So to summarize, self or essence, whether individual or universal, or in some circumstances, spirit. Maybe, though, if you're in a pub, you want to make it clear what type of spirit you're talking about.
I think for me that which spirit would be used would be very clear. That's a translation for Atma. No, but that's very helpful, Vijay. And I think, understanding how to use these words, what's the historical context of them in the translation, I think it makes it easier for understand why we want to use different words, and also allows us to explain it when others ask, why simply can't you just use the word soul? So thank you again for a wonderful explanation. And I just realized that we've gone through a full episode and I haven't yet complimented you on how handsome you look. You're looking very dapper today. And I must add, I really love your shirt. And we actually look a little different today. Normally we're matching both in our shiny bald heads as well as our face, but today I have a beard. So that's our differentiating point. That's why you can't translate Vijay for Samir. You have to have different words. But that brings us to an end of today's episode. Thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you, Vijay, for your erudite explanations. And namaste. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next episode. Namaste and thank you.